PodLayer is an independent research project which focuses on observing subtle but specific human aesthetic qualia, trying to see what connections can be made regarding their various patterns. This is the focus of PodLayer public experiments, as it is comprised of these empirical observations that are the forensic evidence being put forth for the public at large to take a look at and see what they can make of it. You will be experimenting to see if you could observe certain patterns in physiological cues of the human face that make for subtle aesthetic qualia categories to be noted, including what these cues and category of cues are, how they group together, and what potential import might that have. The mojo phenomenon is the name given to the discovery that there are 16 specialized innate aesthetic qualia categories of humans that can be observed through subtle innate physiological cues that people continuously manifest. This can be noted with the naked human eye once properly trained. Humans are better at subtle face and body physiological cue identification, such as microexpressions, than computers are, and therefore it is this kind of human lens that is employed in these experiments. This is one of the first 3 experiments which show you something you can likely already do to some degree without any prior training. Like the experiments on sub versus ob and jez versus zez, this uses the second gear of innate human qualia reading, or mojo reading. There are 5 gears in total, but it is gears 1 and 2 that are the focus in the beginning. The lens of your own eyes and the mental faculties within you that give what they see meaning is what you'll be using to make your observations throughout this experiment. The data being used in this experiment are visual samples of faces of a selection of various famous people. The goal is to better understand humans, as there are patterns of importance once seen, such as career demographics as well as relationship patterns in general, and suggest what might drive these things, which merits further investigation. For those interested in seeing what PodLayer research has to offer, here is one of the 3 initial experiments distinguishing qualia from qualia. In this experiment, we will be working to distinguish between natural state boundary setting versus natural state approachability. Again, as mentioned in the other ones, natural state is when a physiological maneuver that is being done by a person is more natural, comfortable, and easy, as compared to altered state, where it is more of a reach and it is more of a energy curbing. So the natural state is comfortable, easy, energy gaining, as compared to reaching and energy curbing. Important to note, though, that this is a subtle difference of an instrument of a human's kind of base setting, and is separate from skillfulness or habitual use of those physiological cue maneuvers. Alright, there's quite a lot to the versus qualia distinction, and in future series we'll get even more into that, but for right now we're going to be focusing on some initial easier things to see, but even here it'll be helpful if we divide it down. So there are 2 elements to the boundary setting or approachability that we will separate and then bring together at the end of the experiment. Boundary setting basically means that a person gives off an energy that they are taking up space, or that they are looking at something with a particular kind of energy with their eyes, so that they are not as readily approachable. So natural boundary setting automatically means that you have altered state approachability. Vice versa, with approachability, the eyes and the face give a overall vibe that you can approach. At the same time, they have altered state boundary setting. Now with those who are qualia, they're going to have both this natural state approachability in the eyes and the face, but certain samples you'll be able to note it easier in one of the areas than the other, although the other area is still there supporting. So if a person has the qualia in their eyes, they'll also have the qualia in their face. And vice versa, for those who have the qualia, if they have it in their eyes, they'll also have it in their face, although one will take precedence as far as being easier to see than the other. Once you actually know how to use both these things, you can use that to check yourself. So if you're seeing in the eyes, you should see it in the face. If you're seeing in the eyes, you'll see it in the face. Or if you see it in the face first, whatever you're seeing in the face, if it's or you should also see that in the eyes. An important thing to note here, this is relevant in general, but with the sub versus ob and the jez versus zez, there is more of a overall structure versus a movement in the face. And so those can be described a bit more mechanically in a way, although it's still subtle to note them. But now we're going to start getting into areas where, to describe what we're seeing, words are going to have difficulty being there. So over the years, boundary setting and approachability are the best approximations that I've come up with for what will be seen. But really what you're seeing is and ad. And that's why we use those terms, because you'll need to take a tour of these samples that have those qualities to make that association. Because perhaps when you conceptualize boundary setting or conceptualize approachability, it's not exactly what is being meant here. So those words are just an initial kind of placeholder in your mind to look for, but what you're really going for is when you see the dir samples or ad samples is the visual catalog of samples and the visual qualia, the observable qualia they have, and the commonality of that qualia, and that commonality of qualia being associated with dir or ad. Dir versus ad is a good place to start because it is a distinction people tend to find easier in the beginning, and it is a key foundation to understanding and observing more subtle qualia distinctions. Many of the other distinctions going forward, they will have elements of sub or ob, things like that, but the dir versus ad distinction is the most important overall, as it actually affects pretty much every other qualia distinction you'll be making as you go forward in your training. When you are ready to go to the Rosetta Stone of the Human Soul website, link below in the description box, go there and click on the Sample Server Program from the Navigation bar tab. You'll select the following samples to work with. The 4 ad-ob qualia categories, A-grade samples in random order in tour mode for 100 samples. The 4 ad-ob qualia categories you need to select will be listed in the description box below. You are to look for a subtle quality of ad, mainly in the eyes, which are characterized by a receptivity or drinking in of the environment with the eyes, a lifted or playful aspect, as well as a look of being surprised or a readiness to be surprised. These faces have many differences, but they will all share this natural state approachability commonality. Click through the 100 samples to see if you think you can note it, taking whatever time feels right to you. If you're able to see these physiological cue distinctions, proceed to the next stage. Next, you'll start a new collage. You will select the following samples to work with. The 4 Dir'Sub qualia categories, A-grade samples in random order in tour mode of 100 samples. The 4 Dir'Sub qualia categories you need to select will be listed in the description box below. You are to look for a subtle quality of dir, mainly in the eyes, which are characterized by a penetrating gaze or studying the environment with your eyes, a heavy or serious aspect, as well as a look of sureness or being wary. These faces have many differences, but they will all share this natural state boundary setting commonality. Click through the 100 samples to see if you think you can note it, taking whatever time feels right to you. If you are able to see these physiological cue distinctions, proceed to the next stage. Alright, start a new collage. You will select the following samples to work with. The 4 ad-ob qualia categories and the 4 Dir'Sub qualia categories. A-grade samples in random order in quiz mode for 100 samples. Choose the directive versus adaptive buttons. Click through, selecting whether or not you think the sample you see has the ad qualia, in which case you press the adaptive button, or the dir qualia, in which case you press the directive button. If you receive a score of 75% or more, you can proceed to the next stage. If not, you can stop the experiment here, or you can retake this quiz until 75% or more is achieved. You may want to take a break to recharge your lens before proceeding. We're now going to get into the other aspect of dir versus ad, which is how that is represented in the physiological cues of the face, notably the cheeks and mouth. Alright, so you will select the following samples to work with. The 4 ad-sub qualia categories, A-grade samples in random order in tour mode for 100 samples. The 4 ad-sub qualia categories you need to select will be listed in the description box below. You are to look for the subtle quality of ad, mainly in the face, specifically in the area of the mouth and cheeks, which are characterized by a calming or balanced aspect, a comfortability with holding one's personal space, as well as a look of being impacted or a readiness to be impacted. These faces have many differences, but they will all share this natural state approachability commonality. Click through the 100 samples to see if you think you can note it, taking whatever time feels right to you. If you're able to see these physiological cue distinctions, proceed to the next stage. Now to start a new collage, you will select the following samples to work with. The 4 Dir'Ob qualia categories, A-grade samples in random order in tour mode of 100 samples. The 4 Dir'Ob qualia categories you need to select will be listed in the description box below. You are to look for the subtle quality of dir, mainly in the face, specifically in the area of the mouth and cheeks, which are characterized by a forceful or emboldened aspect, a comfortability with putting oneself forward, as well as a look of taking action or a readiness to take action. These faces have many differences, but they will all share this natural state boundary setting commonality. Click through the 100 samples to see if you think you can note it, taking whatever time feels right to you. If you're able to see these physiological cue distinctions, proceed to the next stage. When you're ready, start a new collage. You will select the following samples to work with: the 4 Ad-Sub Qualia categories and the 4 Dir'Ob Qualia categories, A-grade samples in random order in quiz mode for 100 samples. Choose the directive versus adaptive buttons. Click through, selecting whether or not you think the sample you see has the Ad Qualia, in which case you press the adaptive button, or the Dir Qualia, in which case you press the directive button. If you receive a score of 75% or more, you can proceed to the next stage. If not, you can stop the experiment here, or you can retake this quiz until 75% or more is achieved. You may want to take a break to recharge your lens before proceeding. All right, we're going to put this all together now. Start a new collage. You will select the following samples to work with: all 8 of the Ad Qualia categories, A-grade samples in random order in tour mode for 100 samples. The 8 Ad Qualia categories you need to select will be listed in the description box below. You are to look for a subtle quality of Ad, which includes the natural state approachability of both eyes and face. Some samples will have this qualia more notable in the eyes and less so with the face, or more notable in the face and less so in the eyes. But either way, both aspects of natural state approachability will be present. These faces have many differences, but they will all share this natural state approachability commonality. Click through the 100 samples to see if you think you can note it, taking whatever time feels right to you. If you're able to see these physiological distinctions, proceed to the next stage. Next, start a new collage. You will select the following samples to work with: all 8 of the Dir Qualia categories, A-grade samples in random order in tour mode for 100 samples. The 8 Dir Qualia categories you will need to select will be listed in the description box below. You are to look for the subtle quality of Dir, which includes the natural state boundary setting of both eyes and face. Some samples will have this qualia more notable in the eyes and less so in the face, or more notable in the face and less so in the eyes. But either way, both aspects of natural state boundary setting will be present. These faces have many differences, but they will all share this natural state boundary setting commonality. Click through the 100 samples to see if you think you can note it, taking whatever time feels right to you. If you are able to see these physiological cue distinctions, proceed to the next stage. Here we go. Start a new collage. You will select the following samples to work with: all 16 Qualia categories, A-grade samples in random order in quiz mode for 100 samples. Choose the directive versus adaptive buttons. Click through, selecting whether or not you think the sample you see has the Ad Qualia, in which case you press the adaptive button, or the Dir Qualia, in which case you press the directive button. If you receive a score of 75% or more, you can proceed to the next stage. If not, you can stop the experiment here, or you can retake this quiz until 75% or more is achieved. All right, that's the main part of the experiment, so some thoughts afterwards. If you want to continue this experiment, but you did not get 75% your first time through, then take it as many times as you need to in order to achieve that. If you were looking for that kind of proof of concept on your first go, in which case if you don't get it, you're going to move on, here's where you can say that you tried the experiment and it didn't work for you, and you can go ahead and move on, and that is totally understandable. However, if anyone who actually feels that this is interesting enough to keep looking into, then you just have to keep doing it until you get over 75%. That will be necessary, base groundwork to build on for the progressions going forward. If you have gotten yourself acclimated to seeing these cues at the 100 sample size, try then expanding that with endurance runs. Go for 200, 350, 500, 700, 1,000. Building yourself up. If you can do 1,000 right out the gate, you're more than welcome to do that as well. I'm still trying to figure out what is a good size for people when they're first beginning, so I think 100 is good to start with, and 1,000 is a good endurance goal to shoot for. And then you can build up in small increments, or you can just go from 100 to 1,000 if you feel you're ready for that jump. I'll leave that to personal discretion. Some pro tips, as mentioned in other areas: distinguishing between male and female. That is your lens when distinguishing differences between different people. Male and female is one that does automatically, so if you can reduce the processing power used for that function, that'll be extra processing power for what you need for this specific quiz. So if you're being challenged at all by this, you feel it's a bit difficult, separating out males and females can be helpful, and then integrating them together later on. If you feel that's not a problem for you at all, then you can go right for both genders. But I would actually play with both. Even if you feel you can do both genders to start with, I would still go and play with individual genders afterwards, just to kind of note how the subtle quality of dir versus ad is a little bit different when on a male versus female, because of basic bone structure, estrogen versus testosterone, things like that do give it a subtle different quality aspect that is important to note. So you can actually separate them at the beginning and then put them together, or start them together and then separate them afterwards. But it's good to know both those and be able to note the distinctions. Now the pro tip is there's a concept of yang versus yin, and that's one that we'll need to bring in now. There's natural state and altered state, and that's an important concept. Another one is yang versus yin. In all these dichotomy distinctions, there's always a yang and a yin in that distinction. So with sub versus ob, sub is more yin to the yang of ob. With zez versus zhez, zez is the more yang, zhez is the more yin. Here, dir is the yang and ad is the yin. However, your lens is designed to see all these things. Your lens is capable of seeing all those yang-yin distinctions, which is great, but that means that also they can get confused. So one in particular that may arise here is the quality categories that you see, the dir ones that have zhi. Zhi we'll get more into later on, but it has a warmth to it sometimes, an affability. And that affability can be mistaken for approachability. So that's very, very important. So when it comes to zhez versus zez, zhi is zhez, more yin. But when it comes to dir versus ad, then zhi is dir, and it is yang in this case. But sometimes that warm, beaming aspect of it can seem friendly, can seem affable, and things like that, and that can be mistaken for approachability. On the other side, for the ad samples, is the Zai mojos, those that have Zai in their descriptor, their label. That, again, we'll get more in the future, but for here, it can have a quality of being impassive, and this impassiveness can seem sometimes a bit daunting to people, like how would I approach someone who's impassive? But impassive is not forward, and so impassiveness is actually ad, that is approachable. But sometimes that chilliness can be seen as yang, and in a difference between zhez and zez, that is yang. Zez is yang to the yin of zhez, but here, approachability versus boundary setting, it's yin. So a little pro tip there, just to pay a little extra attention to, that may help out. And one last thing, you can do this any point you want, is that sometime in the future, give a little time off, come back and try this experiment again when you've had time to let the samples, you've forgotten them some. And what will happen is your memory of the exact faces and the exact labels on the screen, when you're looking at those faces, that will ebb away, but the principles of making the distinction will still be there. So see how well you can do in this quiz if you take some time away, maybe do other experiments, but circle back around here maybe a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, and see how well you can do without having the immediate teaching, and see how well you can do when you do it kind of like cold. Take time off and just come back to it cold and see what you can do. At the end of this experiment, there are a few questions to ask. Can you see these physiological cues with significant regularity, 75% or more? Did you find it interesting to try to make these visual distinctions as an exercise? Is watching humans for subtle cues enjoyable for you? Did you find it interesting that these distinctions are there to be noted? Was there satisfaction felt when you looked for these distinctions with your lens and then your lens was able to find them? Do you think that these cues you have now noted might mean something? Are you inclined to look for these cues in people you see going forward to see where and how often these distinctions might continue to show up? Does noting these distinctions arouse a strong curiosity in you to see what other patterns of subtle physiological cue distinctions there might be? If you answer yes to these questions, then you're ready to try further experiments. And this is the last of the, you can do it in any order, but there are 3 initial or Series 1 experiments. If you have completed all 3 of these Series 1 experiments, then you are ready to try Series 2, which will be coming soon. As always, after posting your screenshot, feel free to ask any related follow-up questions you have, and any feedback on what the experience was like for you is greatly appreciated.